Hi, this is Brian 2 in San Diego, California, April 16th, 2017, at 9 o'clock in the morning. I want to talk about how the CIA and the DOD use the occult, haunted houses, and other spoofing tactics in order to determine what targeted individuals and entire communities can maintain as truth, because they did this to me and they've done it time and time again. They target the belief system of their victims for several reasons, mainly to determine what the target or the community, whoever's targeted, person or group of people, can maintain as truth. To determine not only what they can maintain as truth, but to subdue or to radicalize their belief system. Born-again Christians, it's very important because born-again Christians are targeted. They call it the FUNVAX. It's a fundamental vaccine that the Department of Defense is using right now against the Muslims in Iraq and other countries. It's also testing on American citizens who they consider to be fundamentalists in nature, meaning who adhere to the infallible, inerrant Word of God, sound doctrine, etc. They view these people, like myself, very suspiciously. And they're using, trauma-based mind control, state-of-the-art mind control, omega programming, beta programming, a lot of different programs to achieve this. State-of-the-art mind control is basically based on the ignorance of the victim. The victim has no idea that he or she is targeted with this technology. And so it's more easy to get the victim to become dependent upon the system, meaning the victim begins to believe that the responses that he or she is receiving are their own. So at that point, they begin to inject with subconscious responses by way of this fabricated, falsified stream of energy into the cerebral cortex of the victim. These subconscious responses of, dishonesty, positive recognition, anxiety, fear, other motivational impulses, to generate emotional responses, which can be remotely measured and integrated back into R&M data. That's state-of-the-art mind control. Trauma-based mind control is just brute force hacking of the brain, of the mind of the victim. So they must discredit the victim at all costs. If they do not discredit the victim, then they have a problem, a big problem, that people begin to believe the victim. I constantly say I'm being attacked in my heart. My other internal organs are being attacked every night. And people say, well, to me, well, if it was the CIA, you would have been DOD, you would have been dead a long time ago. Well, they obviously know nothing about this technology, biocommunications technology, and they demonstrate their ignorance of trauma-based mind control and how it works. The victim will die a premature death. That's by design. The victim's internal organs simply cannot endure the trauma. They don't want witnesses. But the point is, that's the difference between trauma-based mind control and state-of-the-art mind control. They're literally able to generate, sounds and voices, aromas, images, etc., which can be forced into the target's perception, thoughts, emotions, etc. I'm talking about these motivational impulses using a combination of directed energy, and I'll get into this more detail shortly, and what's called nanotechnology. Basically, they've turned the brain of the victim into their very own visual, verbal, and auditive communication system. They're using a fabricated and falsified stream of electromagnetic low-frequency waves specifically tuned to the brainwave signature of the victim. This stream, this bidirectional stream known as the information and injection feedback loop, which scientists call the neural link, contains a hidden carrier frequency. And that hidden carrier frequency is what is specifically tuned to the brainwave, unique, one-of-a-kind brainwave signature of the victim, designed to interfere with the victim's memory and thought process. So they obtain the brainwave signature, digital brainwave imprint of the victim, and after they're able to remotely measure that, they then upload that back into a conscious computer, and then they remotely tie the victim for life to that conscious computer by way of this bidirectional stream of electromagnetic low-frequency waves, turning basically the brain of the victim into their very own visual, verbal, and auditive communication system, like I just said, their own very own digital receiver. The victim is a walking digital receiver. The victim's brain has been digitalized with a nanotechnology inside it. So they need the victim to become dependent, especially when they're targeting the belief system of a victim, okay? They need the victim to become dependent upon the system, to believe that the impulse injections, memory attacks, etc., the remote neural attacks, they become dependent upon the system and believe that the responses that they're having are their own. If they don't become dependent upon the system, then the hive mind teams dedicated to the victim every 8 hours, I'll get into that in more detail shortly, with some degree of overlap, need to at least understand that those responses are consistent in nature. Only then can they begin to inject with the subconscious responses I just mentioned: positive recognition, dishonesty, anxiety, etc. Okay, that's what I mean when I call it a fabricated and falsified stream of energy. So this is constant mental manipulation designed to interfere with the memory and thought process of the victim. They're trying to begin to shape the victim's thoughts and behavior. How? By deception and manipulation of the daily motives and emotional perceptions of the victim. Well, there are other ways, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But that's one of the ways. So they basically use it. CIA, DIA mind control technologies, all programs, and there are hundreds, okay? Trauma-based mind control, state-of-the-art mind control, just two, okay, that I've been targeted with. But, it's all everything's based on three things: censorship, memory management, direct behavioral control. That's everything they're doing to their victims. Censorship is their ability to restrict the victim at will, using trauma and pain, to achieve behavior modification, to disrupt the continuity of thought, to erase short-term memory, etc. That's called censorship. They need to censor the activities of the victim, preventing the victim from engaging, or at least to minimize the cognitive effect of any external interference the victim engages in, which interferes with their technology. That's called censorship. The second is memory management. Don't have time to explain it. Look at my previous videos. It's basically blocking the real memories of the victim and injecting with fabricated and falsified memories. And then there's direct behavioral control. Again, don't have time to explain it. Look at my previous videos. I went into it in great detail. Direct behavioral control. Basically, the remote neural attacks, what I'm talking about here is the belief system of the victim, because they've been targeting mine for years. The remote neural attacks are designed to include voice of God weapons, synthetic telepathy, etc., impulse injections, and so forth, to make the victim believe that, the God of their choice is speaking with them, either verbally or intuitively, using symbols, thoughts, images, emotions, and that's entirely believable by people that have never experienced this biocommunications technology before. I mean, the Muslims in 1991 in Iraq, the Muslim soldiers were easily deceived and manipulated with this technology to surrender and dismantle their weapons. And that was in 1991. That's just a fact, a historical fact, that this technology was used on them. CIA has a long history of mind control atrocities dating back to MK Ultra, even before that. So the mind control victim basically is convinced that the God of their choice is speaking with them, either or angels or demons or devils or even aliens, depending on their belief system. If they're atheist or agnostic, obviously God's not going to work, So that whatever. Again, everything's specifically tailored to their belief system. They build a profile of the victim and then they target the victim based on that profile. I'm next to a train station. Based on that profile. So, it's believable by people who know nothing about this technology, which is the majority of the sheep in this world. They targeted me with this technology in 1997 when I was in the Cayman Islands, right after I returned from Nicaragua. I was walking past the police station in the Cayman Islands, and I was headed to the British West Indies campus of the University of Liverpool in Grand Cayman, Georgetown, and I passed a couple, a man and a woman, standing at the entrance of a police station. And, I didn't say anything to them. I just kept walking. And then I heard this audible sound suddenly say, "Speak to them," this omnipotent voice. And I suddenly had all these thoughts about God. I knew the voice hadn't come from anyone because no one was around me. So I walked back and forth thinking I was hearing things. I just kept going. And that was followed up by directed energy attacks that would land me into the hospital, collapsing, unable to breathe. Doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong, put me on oxygen, organized stalking, etc. That's just when that's when I realized that it was happening, when it was well underway. Now, I can't tell you when it started. It could go back to childhood. If I connect the dots, it does go back to childhood. But the point is believing that God was speaking to me. I walked back and forth in front of the entrance of that police station. And I didn't say anything to them. I just watched them. And then, thinking I was hearing things, I just continued my journey to the University of Liverpool, British West Indies campus. And I always regretted that for years, thinking, God was speaking to me, only to realize much later in life that I have become a victim, a non-consensual human experimentee in CIA, DI mind control technologies, and believe that the rest of my family may also be targeted. In fact, I know for a fact some of them are. I know this for a fact. They've already told me. But I think it's a lot more. And I think it's been going on for quite a while. And I think it didn't start with me, but I can't prove that. So the point is, the day after I filed a federal lawsuit against them in 2011, because I finally figured out what was going on, I was a victim of this technology. Well, it moved me from state-of-the-art mind control, which is based on the ignorance of the victim, to trauma-based mind control the very next day. And it's just been brutal, systematic torture ever since, with specific emphasis on targeting my internal organs, my ears, my heart, etc. They target organs of control. the heart, the digestive system, the respiratory system. They target those organs of control. They're able to manipulate the central nervous system of the victim, and so target those specific organs in different ways by manipulation of the cerebral cortex of the victim, the visual cortex, sensory cortex, motor cortex, etc. They're targeting, by modulation of the phase, frequency, and amplitude of the stream of energy. They can target any area of the human anatomy. And so I've suffered severe acoustic trauma and nerve damage to my ears. Was never able to get help in the United States. No medical documentation whatsoever. And when I would go overseas to countries which I fled to for asylum, like Iceland and Switzerland, couldn't get any medical help there either. It's called medical COINTELPRO. Been going on for quite some time. In Nicaragua, for example, they shut me out of the only hospital in the entire country which provides, medical care comparable to that of, American medical care, Hospital Metropolitano. So I couldn't even get back in to see the ear doctor, and the audiologist who had, documented the damage. But ear doctors in Ecuador had too. But places like Hong Kong and Europe, I just got manhandled in those places. It's called medical COINTELPRO. Well, it's not just medical COINTELPRO they're targeting. They're targeting the belief system of their victims. And the reason that they're able to get away with these atrocities, and they've been doing it for quite some time, okay? Hundreds of thousands of people are trauma-based, and millions of Americans have been targeted with this technology over the last 25 years. The reason they're able to get away with it is because there's a perceived 70 to 80 year gap between the technology available on the market and the technology which the CIA and the DI, the government, possesses. And they're probably several centuries ahead of the technology which is not available on the market. And we don't know exactly what they have, but it's probably pretty sophisticated and advanced. So basically, they want to determine what society or what a community or what a person, whoever the target is, can maintain as truth. They want to be able to subdue or to radicalize. Pay attention to those words. Maintain as truth, subdue or radicalize the belief system of the victim. So a lot of these hauntings and possessions, etc., are nothing more than fabricated and falsified situational and conversational scenarios. Not all of them. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it doesn't happen to the extent that the religious believe it to happen. Okay, the effects are real. Okay, but the demon possession, for example, is nothing more than artificially induced multiple personality disorder. The alter speaking out. The brain has a tendency to protect itself from extreme trauma by the core personality splitting into what are called alter personalities. The alter personalities are then located with psychological probing techniques, and then they are reprogrammed, repatterned, using dream modulation, neurolinguistic programming, etc. I don't have time to go into that. I've talked about it before in my previous videos. Look it up. But the effects that they believe that are happening, the demonic possessions, etc. These religious experiences are very important to their training, research, and development. Trauma-based mind control is itself based on three things: neuroscience, psychology, and what's called satanic ritual abuse. And satanic ritual abuse is basically ritualistic, systematic torture. Okay, so they've basically taken science, neuroscience, and they've married it to the occult. That's basically what they've done. Okay, so they use these specific scripts, conversational, situational scenarios, tailor-made scripts, to based on the belief system of the victim. Based on the haunted house, the demon possession, based on God, angels, their understanding of God, angels, demons, devils, etc., even aliens, to create extreme psychological trauma. Physical trauma is not enough. They must create. That's why they wake me up every night. They feel my heart vibrating and the other things they're doing to my heart. Physical trauma is not enough. Long-term brutal psychological trauma is necessary to force the victim to disassociate from reality. So to create this extreme psychological fear and paranoia in the victim, which is necessary for trauma-based mind control to be effective, the main objective is to create such severe, extreme psychological trauma in the victim that the victim begins to physically and psychologically shut down, no longer able to function in society, to begin to isolate themselves from even family and friends, which is necessary for their technology to work properly. Okay, they need to isolate the victim, so they create a hostile environment everywhere the victim goes, even in church. Everywhere the victim goes, they use slander, lies, manufactured evidence, etc. Manufactured evidence, they can easily manufacture evidence against a person who's been brutally tortured to near incoherency with sleep deprivation torture, directed energy torture, etc. I got 30 minutes of sleep last night. this has been going on for years. They can actually pitch the victim into psychosis with severe torture. But they want to so traumatize the mind control victim that they cause them to physically and psychologically begin to shut down. No longer able to function in society, beginning to isolate themselves. So they create a hostile environment everywhere the victim goes in order to force the victim into isolation, where their technology, the neuroprogramming, is more effective, where the brain of the victim can be forced to internalize or internally focus on the neuroprogramming where there's no external interference, that dampens the neural link between the supercomputer and the victim's brain. They must minimize all external interference. Again, that's called censorship. Censorship, memory management, direct behavioral control. That's everything they're doing to their victims. Okay, so this technology, I said it before in other videos. I'll say it again. It's basically works the opposite of the movie Clockwork Orange. I didn't see the movie, but I saw parts of it, little snippets of it, and I read about it. Basically, the theme of this movie, Clockwork Orange, was scientists wanted to take a bad person and turn him into a good person. They wanted to take a violent criminal and turn him into a peaceful pacifist, a person who was shut down in the face of extreme violence. Well, they used, hypnosis, behavior modification, and other techniques, and they basically failed. But that was the theme of the movie. Well, trauma-based mind control technology works the opposite of the movie Clockwork Orange. They use this neuroprogramming, etc., to turn a good person into a bad person, or a bad person into an evil person, homosexual into a heterosexual, or vice versa, a Muslim into a Jew, a peaceful person into a violent offender who will, inflict destruction upon his or her community. They will, engage in extreme violence. So it's basically, if you just think of the movie Clockwork Orange, basically it works, the same way. They want to turn a peaceful person, for example, into a violent person who will inflict damage and destruction upon others, or who will self-destruct, such as, on command by trigger stimuli, by images, objects, words, etc. Colors, So this is important. This is a weapon system. Okay, this is not for the betterment of humanity. This is a weapon system. This is neural warfare. Okay, Arab Spring, that was neural warfare between the Americans and the Russians. Notice that stopped. The reason Arab Spring stopped is because it backfired on the CIA. Instead of being able to turn these Arab states, where they had created these revolutions by targeting certain segments of the populace with electromagnetic low frequency waves, causing them to become enraged and agitated and turn on the government. And this neural warfare didn't work. It backfired on the CIA. These Arab states didn't become puppet states. They fragmented and became more. The segments of society fragmented, and they became more radical and fundamental in their beliefs, more terroristic in their ideology. So they backfired. They stopped that. It didn't work like they wanted it to do. They need more training, research, and development before they go after entire populations again. Or they don't have the technology to go after an entire population, but they can target segments of populations, and that's what they did in Ukraine. They targeted the city center, the population, and caused them to become enraged and agitated, and caused a group of a few thousand people to storm the presidential palace and overthrow the government. Again, this is technology that is not the common person simply cannot understand. It's called the Occam razor principle. The more complicated the truth, the less the likelihood of belief by the ordinary person. Accept or reject what I'm telling you. It's up to you. You will believe it, but by the time you do, it will be too late. So basically, the objective is to turn the victim into a weapon. This is a weapon system, a weapon who will inflict destruction upon others, or who will self-destruct, like Byron May, the Florida State shooter, Aaron Alexis, the Navy Yard shooter, Aurora, Colorado Batman movie shooter exhibited symptoms and signs of this. Even the Las Vegas shooter who killed 60 people and wounded over 500, some critically, was complaining of symptoms of this technology. So a lot of people are targeted. So the point is the amount of damage and destruction that the victim inflicts upon his or her community, or upon himself, whether he inflicts destruction upon others or self-destructs, that's an important metric. The amount of damage and destruction, that's an important metric in their training, research, and development to determine the effectiveness of their technology. The effectiveness of the cognitive strategies which trauma-based mind control is based upon. Again, remote neural manipulation, remote neural monitoring, I've talked about it quite a lot in my previous videos. Don't have time to talk about it now, but they use this remote neural manipulation, mind control, Remote neural monitoring is not mind control. That's just remote neural manipulation is mind control. But they use this technology and with dream modulations, nightmares, induced visions, and so forth. They use it on me that way. Okay, I'll explain that in just a second. To make the victim believe that God, angels, demons, devils, etc., are talking to them, speaking to them verbally or intuitively in some manner. And so they'll use images, objects, symbols, to make them believe the God of their choice. Now that's important, the God of their choice. Remember, this is specifically tailored to the belief system of the victim. So, if it's Muslim, there'll be jinn-based hauntings. If it's Christian, there'll be demon-based hauntings, and so forth. To make the victims believe that the God of their choice is speaking to them in a dream, vision, etc. So most of those trauma-based mind control victims will soon find out that those dreams will turn into nightmares, with objects beginning to move on their own in the house. So that's a haunting or a spoofing tactic which they use, and they can move objects in the house easily using concentrations of energy called synthetic telekinesis. I don't have time to explain that. It's called synthetic telekinesis. It can even be replicated by the common person, by the ordinary person in the common home using, for example, organic material and cellular radiation. It's called synthetic telekinesis. They move objects to make the victim believe he's being haunted. They can target the human anatomy in such a way, the cerebral cortex, the visual cortex, in such a way to make the victim's eyes become so dilated. The pupils of the eye so dilated when the victim looks in the mirror, he believes he's haunted. And when you accompany all this other stuff, dreams, nightmares, visions, objects moving on their own, etc., all tailored to this belief system of the victim, then they're able to fabricate this haunting, this possession. So they'll use hot and cold sensations, voices, sounds, images, objects, again moving on their own, all replicated to create a haunting based on the victim's belief system. If the victim is Christian, then it'll be demon-based haunting, demon-based possession. If the victim is a Muslim, it'll be a jinn-based haunting, and so forth. This is very important because when this basically allows the CIA and the Department of Defense to spoof an individual or entire community into emotional responses which can be remotely measured, to pitch them into an action or access sequence for the purpose of remote neural manipulation and ultimately to achieve direct behavioral control over them. They need real people. They need guinea pigs for their research. It doesn't work on animals. Mind control doesn't work on animals. They need real people, and they're using people like me. In 1991, for example, the first Gulf War, Muslim soldiers, they targeted Muslim soldiers in Iraq with this technology, causing many thousands of them to surrender with their weapons dismantled. Well, the reporter became curious and wanted to know why. I understand, he said, why you surrendered. You didn't want to get killed, but why did every one of you dismantle your weapons first? And they all said the same thing that he spoke to. The Muslim soldiers said that, Allah told us that before we could surrender to the Americans, we had to dismantle our weapons. Well, it wasn't their false god, Allah. It was the CIA and DoD using mind control technologies on the Iraqi soldiers to make them believe that the God of their choice was speaking to them, to manipulate them, to pitch them into an action or access sequence. In this case, it was to surrender and dismantle their weapons before they did so. And it worked. The technology worked. And that was back in 1991. So basically, they're targeting the belief systems of a population or a person. And it's very effective in countries that are, very religious, such as the Middle East. Just about the whole world is religious to some extent. Okay? So this technology works very well, Jesus and God the Father and the Holy Spirit are quite real, okay? But all these sightings of Muhammad and Buddha and Mary, and these are just holograms designed to subdue or to radicalize, to subdue the belief system or radicalize the belief system of a population, to determine what that population can maintain as truth. Subdue or radicalize, maintain as truth. That's the key to targeting the belief systems of the victim. It allows basically the CIA to manipulate entire populations at a time. I don't know how wide the bit stream is with the directed energy that they're able to target. It must be quite wide, I would imagine, because they're able to target thousands of people at one time. So how is it deployed? Well, I've said this before, but I always like to say it in my videos when I have a chance so people understand. The technology, I've heard people come up with the most ridiculous things, and some of it deliberately so, perps on the internet to mislead and confuse. I'm going to explain to you how the technology is deployed. Okay, try to say this in all my videos, but because people may not have a chance to see all the videos, the other ones. A computer multiplexer. Remember, you're being attacked by a supercomputer. Okay, all right. A computer multiplexer therefore routes the signal to a tower, satellite, or mobile platform, and then the tower, satellite, or mobile platform then relays the signal to the digital receiver, similar to how cell phone technology works. So the digital receiver is tracked and pinpointed in real time, just like a cell phone, because CIA and DIA mind control technologies depend upon timing and location. But with CIA and DI mind control technologies, CIA and DoD mind control technologies, the digital receiver is not a phone, it's a human brain. The brain of their victim has been digitalized by the nanotechnology inside of it. That's how they're able to target thousands of people at a time. They've been spraying, the U.S. government has been spraying the nanotechnology into the hydrosphere for the last 25 years along storm patterns, which then the nanotech then filters down into the water supply and the food chain, and every man, woman, and child in America is targeted. Every tourist that's ever visited America, every person that's passed through an American airport and consumed the water or the food is infected. Every person that's eaten, candy or other food products or drank a Coca-Cola that's been manufactured and imported abroad, they're infected with this technology. The technology is in their body. Once in the body, the nanotechnology migrates to the brain and adheres to the neurotransmitters of the victim's brain, and then begins to speak to and decode those neurotransmitters through a process called transcranial brain stimulation. I don't have time to explain that. Look at my previous videos. The nanotechnology is activated in the victim's brain by way of what's called directed energy flashing. They use photons to basically illumine the brain of the victim with a stream of photons, electromagnetic frequency waves, and then they read the return training signal. Okay, that's how they read the brain of the victim. That's how they map out the victim's brain into a cognitive model. Again, this technology allows. This is a weapon system which allows for greater degrees of indirection and plausible deniability by the government. This is not for the betterment of humanity. They'll lie and tell you that this is to turn America and the industrialized world into a neuro society where people can communicate with each other in computers by way of their brainwaves. All that's possible, but that's not why. This is a weapon system. Okay, neuro warfare, cognitive warfare, psychological warfare. Okay, this is a weapon system designed to censor and control the masses, the sheepish masses at will. Okay, think of thought police. That's what's coming, but it's all automated and active and adaptive, run by supercomputers. Supercomputer, once you're hooked to that system, that mainframe. Your brainwave signature is identified. The supercomputer can monitor in real time. The electromagnetic and manipulate the electromagnetic activity of the victim's brain. Mind control has been around for thousands of years. It has. The greatest mind control tool ever invented by man is organized religion. But whether it's been around, while mind control's been around for thousands of years, this technology and organized religion are very different. So we could say probably that this technology began directed energy interfacing with nanotechnology somewhere around the 1960s, late 1950s, and it's developed exponentially since that time. We try, we scream, we cry to try and to warn the public, the people, that this is happening, but no one listens. The problem is that people. Again, I told you about the Occam razor principle. The more complicated the truth, the less the likelihood of belief by the ordinary person. But it's much worse than that. The government is actually the government controls the mainstream media. Operation Mockingbird in the 1960s and other programs allow total control of the so-called mainstream media. There's no freedom of the press. Freedom of the press, that's a lie. That's an illusion. What they cannot control, what the Department of Defense and the intelligence agencies, the shadow government, cannot control is the internet. The reason they cannot control it is because it is too decentralized. So what they do then is they flood the internet with disinformation and misinformation to drown out the truth. So people can no longer rely on those internet sites as sources of truth and are forced back into the mainstream media where information can be more easily controlled and manipulated. So, that's how they've been able to get away with these atrocities. They discredit their victims, make their victims look crazy. Well, if you've been tortured to near incoherency, you're going to look crazy. You're going to act crazy. They can even cause mental illness. The objective is basically to mimic the dysfunctionality of mental illness. but they can actually cause mental illness. With extreme trauma, they can do that. They can pitch the victim into psychosis and other mental illness. So they can mind hobble the victim using directed energy. They can damage the victim's brain. While this has been going on quite some time, but it started basically in the 1960s, we believe. So the point is that thoughts, images, aromas, impulses, sensations, hot and cold sensations, etc. All this can be implanted into the mind, forced into the target's perception, and it's just as real as if it were happening. The victim feels the pain and the trauma, even though it's entrained into the cerebral cortex of the victim. The victim's skin, for example, is not actually burning, but the sensation that the victim is feeling is just as real. Okay, they have a active denial system which they use. They've deployed in the local police departments in major cities around the world, and here in America too, which causes the skin to itch and burn. It's a method of what they call riot control or crowd control. Basically, they want, but with regard to the belief system of the victim, they want the people to believe, the victim to believe, that the God of their choice is speaking to them. Again, to pitch them some type of action or access sequence. Verbalization of related action. That's verification. That's very important. Verification. Verbalization of related action. They must verify their technology. It's not enough that they're able to read your thoughts in real time, to decode electromagnetic emission patterns of the brain into actual thought patterns. They must verify that those responses are consistent, that those responses are accurate. And so they need the victim to engage in, they constantly run the victim each day through a verification routine to pitch the victim into some type of verbalization or related action with regard to that remote neural attack, that memory attack, that impulse injection, etc., so that they can verify that their technology is working properly. And targeting the doctrines of a person's belief system is very important with regard to their training, research, and development. And again, easily believable by people who have never, had any understanding that this technology exists, that know nothing, or little to nothing about it. I just tell you what they did to me. I was in my bed. This is back before I understood the technology, and I woke up, one morning, and I heard the words, "Time to get up, Brian." I heard it audibly. It was so loud I woke up. Standing over me was a giant, dressed in Middle Eastern garb with a giant medallion around his neck, and within a few seconds he disappeared from my visual field. Well, that happened every night in different ways. For example, the next night, over and over for weeks, an old woman would appear standing over my bed in the middle of the night with her hands stretched out like she was crucified or something. And she too would disappear from my visual field after a few seconds. And this continued for weeks until I was able to research the technology and understand and learn that they're able to induce these visual images by manipulation of the cerebral cortex, the visual cortex of the victim, by targeting the victim's visual cortex with specific streams or a stream of, by modulation of the phase frequency and the amplitude of that stream, they can cause at a specific frequency the victim to see images which are temporarily see images which are not there. That's the difference between a hologram and the manipulation of the visual cortex. Images you see by way of the manipulation of the visual cortex using electromagnetic low frequency waves will disappear from your visual field. A hologram will not. A hologram will not disappear from your visual field. They do use these visual images to manipulate the person, especially the religious target, to make them believe that they spiritually came up with the idea, to give them some type of eureka or hallelujah experience, to make the religious experience more. Again, targeting the belief system of the victim is very important for their training, research, and development. So they want to be able to fabricate and falsify the religious experiences of the target, in order to achieve direct behavioral control over a victim, turn a victim into a suicide bomber or whatever, which is, again, if they don't understand the technology, it's very possible. This is because, religious experiences are by default intense and life-changing in nature. So as you pray, they'll suddenly give you a pulse of energy, causing you to have all these goosebumps, this goose flesh experience. This is designed to amplify the religious experience. This is how the technology is incredible. What they're able to do is just unbelievable. And you try to communicate that to people that this is happening, and they're, oh, no, you're ignorant. You're totally and absolutely ignorant, and you're nothing but a sheep headed for the slaughter. And you're next. You think, this is not, I don't have anything to worry about. This is not me. You're next, man. The technology is in your body of your children. You're next. They're next. And they got you to think of it, to think forward, I should say. So, they use, for example, there are different ways to pipe words into a person's perception, into a person's brain. Audibly, using synthetic telepathy, V2K, and there are basically 4 methods to achieve that. That's part of a remote neural monitoring, remote neural manipulation, RNM technology, which is really only effective once they've been trained your brain to the RNM system. They need to map the brain of the victim into a cognitive model. It's only at that point where they can begin to effectively read and decode the thought patterns of the victim. The system, they want you to think they're omnipotent. They're not. These hive mind teams that are dedicated to the target every 8 hours with some degree of overlap. These cognitive researchers, these psychiatrists, psychologists, neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, people who have some degree of expertise in the area of the mind, that's who make up the hive mind teams. They want you to believe they're omnipotent, but they're not. They're not. Their technology, the mind control technology, is full of fatal flaws. It can easily be disrupted and defeated. That's why they damage my ears so severely. That's behavior modification. They're simply trying to stop the music from breaking brain entrainment with their system. And the torture is incremental, because they're constantly trying to solicit responses from the victim to the torture. Eventually the victim doesn't die, a premature death, obviously. But, people who say, well, this can't be the government because you'd already be dead, they don't and the victim will be dead, okay? But they don't understand the technology. They just demonstrate that their ignorance. You can easily, break brain entrainment by creating a dominant external stimulus, such as listening to pleasing music, and training the victim's brain away from the visual and verbal entrainments of the system. That's how they keep your brain entrained to the system 24 hours a day. 20 subconscious injections of visual and verbal entrainments. They must keep the victim's brain entrained to their system for the technology to work properly. Anything that interferes with that, any type of external activity, pleasing music, whatever, reading a book, they got to stop that. Or at least they got to minimize the cognitive effect of that external interference. And again, that's called censorship. Censorship, memory management, direct behavioral control. That's everything they're doing to their victim. I've talked in great deal about the difference between remote neural monitoring and remote neural manipulation. But, the system, the RNM supercomputer, the system that's targeting people, its ability to be able to interpret the thoughts, to decode actual electromagnetic emissions of the brain into thought patterns, that system they're not omnipotent. Even the supercomputer the system is just full of fatal flaws. It's entirely dependent upon the system, upon the ability of the RNM system to predict and influence the reference choices of the victim during thought composition. Thought composition. As you're formulating your thoughts and you're preparing to act, okay, that's when the system goes into attack mode with these remote neural attacks to deceive and manipulate the victim. So they're targeting your reference choices during thought composition. That's how it works. The system is mapping patterns with impulses and identifiers to link data captured by the RNM system with information regarding your memory references. So these impulses and identifiers, I'm talking about, I'm talking about evoked potentials. I'm talking about synaptic responses. I'm talking about synaptic responses. Okay, they're using that statistical data about your composition habits to link to determine how you will think or act in the future, predict and